Good morning, church family. It's good to be with you here this morning as we continue our daily devotion studying the book of Genesis together. And today we're going to be studying chapters 5 through 9. And this is the flood narrative. And I love this passage. So many things in it that are just very interesting and but also heartbreaking. And so today I'm going to share some observations I have about this passage with you. One of the first things that I notice in this passage is there's a lot of detail, right? God includes so much detail in the flood story. And almost every ancient civilization has some sort of flood narrative, but none of them compare to the story that we find in Genesis. God gives us so much detail, the length of time that it rained, how long the waters were on the earth, and the detailed measurements of the ark, and instructions to know about bringing the animals on, all these different things. And these details show us that the story is much more than just a story, right? It's not a fable, it's not a fairy tale. It's an actual historical account of how God, the God of the universe, destroyed and judged mankind, all except for Noah and his family. And so many people today would suggest to us and tell us that there's no evidence that there was ever a global flood. And I'm here to tell you this morning that this could not be further from the truth. The reality is that there's overwhelming evidence for a global flood, and I wish that I had enough time this morning to go into all of those details, but another time, another day. But what I want you to take from this is that God's word is trustworthy, right? It's true. We can rely on this flood story because it's true. And so another thing that I noticed from this story is the sinfulness of man. You know, we read about how evil the world was at this time, that the intentions of man's heart were only evil continually. Now, that phrase just kind of echoes in my mind, and I try to imagine what that would have been like, how horrible the world would have been. And a lot of times when I think about that, I think about the world today and how much evil we have in our world today. How we're continually eroding away from biblical values in our society. And so what I see from all this, though, is that without God's truth, the world quickly follows after evil. And so we see the sinfulness of man. I also notice how serious God takes sin, right? We see that God was so grieved by the state of mankind that he was moved to destroy the entire world. That's a pretty bad place to be. The entire world was destroyed except for Noah and his family. And what I would see from this is that our sin is a big deal to God, right? Sometimes we look at our sin and we kind of gloss over or maybe ignore it and think that maybe it just doesn't matter that much. But God sees the state of our hearts, and our sin is contrary to his very nature. And so our sin is very serious. And God is moved to act on our sin. And so we see this in the story. The last thing that I see from this is that it's our responsibility to live for God regardless of what's going on around us in the world. We see that Noah was living in perhaps one of the worst times in all of human history, right? Such a terrible time that God was moved to destroy the world, yet Noah is found to be living a righteous life, right? He didn't look at the people around him and think, oh, I've got to fit in, I've got to do the things that other people are doing. Instead, he lived a righteous life before the Lord, regardless of the people around him. And so this should be an encouragement to us as a church today to live our lives holy and pleasing before God, even in a world that is continually following after evil. And so I want to encourage you this morning as we've studied this passage to take a look at this as a reminder of the seriousness of our sin, but also of our responsibility to live out our faith regardless of the people around us and what they choose to do.